Okay, so we're streaming a theater production in COVID times, and we had to decide what it was going to look like. We didn't exactly want it to look like switched multi-camera television. We didn't want to shoot ISO to all three cameras or multiple cameras and then stitch it together later. That felt like it would start to depart from theater and become something more like making a movie, which I would be very excited about, but it seemed to depart from theater. And so this idea of having three cameras shots laid out in the way that you saw as we were getting started seemed like a really interesting, good idea, and something that none of us had seen done to theater before. The viewer gets to decide what they're looking at. It's a little bit like Time Code, the movie by Mike Figgis. And so I mocked it up very, very quickly in OBS, and the director liked it a lot, and we decided we would run with this idea. The stream was on our IBM Watson Ustream account, and there's some specs here for exactly what we used for hardware and what our Ethernet connection was like. No problems to report, no congestion at any point in the process. How every last person's experience was at home, of course, I have no way of knowing if they had hiccups because maybe their bandwidth was a little slow on their end, but the stream behaved itself very nicely and our equipment was just fine. So here's the camera equipment we used and the recorders we used. This is all stuff that we just kind of already had around the building. The happy part of this is it worked. It worked just fine. I don't know that I would take this into production and want to rely on it every day all year long, but it worked. We basically made it work. And I think it was reliable for the run of the show, actually. So we couldn't go any further than 25 feet apart. So we had a camera in the center, we had a camera off to one side and a camera to the other side. The cameras on the side couldn't be further than about 25 feet from the camera in the middle and the encoding computer. So we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. And so I wanted to make sure that the lighting designer had video scopes to look at so that they were lighting for camera, not just lighting for the unaided eye, right? Really, really important because they could do days and days of work and create something absolutely glorious that just falls apart on camera. I didn't want that to happen. I wanted scopes to be part of the design process from the very beginning. So we made that work, although it wasn't quite in the way I'd initially thought we would do. We did get it to work. I've got a couple monitors in my studios that have scopes built in. Because we're not using our studios in COVID times, video studios, I was able to bring one of those upstairs to the theater for a couple of weeks and let that happen. So lighting designer knew exactly what to look for, did have training and understanding what scopes are telling him, and I think was appreciative. And I think we did collectively much better work for it. One thing that showed up on that monitor that I wouldn't necessarily have caught until probably the middle of the first show was there's a little difference between camera black and pedestal black. And we were able to see that on the video monitor, note it in the scope. And I don't like to apply a filter to something that's running live, QLab or OBS. So all just more taxing on the processor. But all I was doing was reducing brightness 5%. And I watched really closely and it didn't seem to be taxing things too much. It seemed to be fine. That was a very nice tweak because, of course, there's lots of black out at the edges of each of the three frames, and I wanted that to just go very nicely to pedestal black, and so we were able to do that easily without a paint box or anything like that. Okay, this is fascinating. There was no source clock, right? Nothing was jamming sync to the other devices, right? Got three free running hardware encoders, all talking to OBS. And I was really worried about this. I didn't know exactly what we were going to get. That's the equipment we had on hand, and I didn't know what we were going to get. So I did a test. The light that's flashing is a Rotolight Neo. I actually happen to have the same light here at home, and it's got some special effects on it. One of them is lightning. So I set it to lightning. I'm sure it was a little annoying to be in the theater that day. People were very gracious to have a blinky light going for a couple of hours. And I ran for 3 hours nonstop, streamed it and archived the stream. And I really only paid close attention to the last couple of minutes of that stream. If things were going to drift apart, if they were going to drift out of sync, presumably they would have drifted the most at the end of 3 hours. And this is the last 2 minutes. This actually is the last 2 minutes of that video test. And it's more than good enough for speech to be in sync, especially at the distance that most of these shots were framed up of the actors on stage. This shouldn't work. I would say this shouldn't work, but I have to point out that it did. And that's interesting. We had visitors from 603 unique devices. The house holds about 175 in the first place. So we already had more people attend 3 shows online than could have physically attended 3 shows in person. So that's pretty cool. About a third of them were on mobile devices, which I think isn't really surprising. So everybody had to refresh at least once is kind of what it looks like. There were 1,400 views for 600 devices. So I think everybody refreshed at least once. That makes me a little curious to know more about the end users' actual experience at home. I watched plenty of it at home, and I also had to refresh once myself. So interesting. What we really get to is how many people. We want to know how many people there were out there. And all we know for sure is unique devices. I don't have my hands on IP addresses. IP addresses that would let me do anything else. IBM just provides me city and state and country, and then a unique ID that's meaningless in any other context outside IBM. So I'm not sniffing IP addresses. IBM sort of does it for us and then cleanses that for us. I'm not looking at directly at IP addresses. Okay, this is my favorite graphic. So here's what audience count actually looked like for the 3 shows in the run of the show. We turned the camera on really, really early, and I have a note about that in lessons learned at the end as well. But so that's what we're seeing here, a full hour and a half before showtime. And there were people joining. Some of us behind the scenes, very excited to make sure things were going correctly. And the technical director of the theater was on from her house in St. Paul at least an hour before every show, and so forth. But so that's what our audience looked like in terms of number of people there. So this gets interesting. I've got a little bit better graphic of this. This is more of a data dump or just a chart view. But you could see what I was getting at is how long were people watching on average, and where were they coming from? So let's move on past this. So this is so interesting. There's a healthy number of people, 150 people watched more than 90% of the duration of a show. A single show, and not broken up into little bits across the 3 days. And then a little bit less than 300 people watched 10% or less of the show. So they're just maybe kind of dipping in and checking it out, seeing what it looked like, seeing what it sounded like, and then they're out of there. So one interesting marketing question, if we had to pursue that, would be, well, how do we move the needle on those folks? How do we get them to stay for maybe a quarter of the show, right? Next time they come to some streaming theater. And then everybody else was in between, somewhere in between, 10 to 90%. So this is really, the graph on the right is the opposite of a bell curve, right? Okay, this is my favorite one. So I've got geolocation, plotted it on a map, and I sorted it by distance. 171 people were coming from the town of Northfield, where the college is. And we know on a cold February night, not all of them would have actually made it in person in usual times had they been able to, but lots of them would have. Another 89 were from within an hour and a half drive. How far would you drive to see someone you know in a show? I don't know, maybe further than that, but I set a little bit of an arbitrary number, an hour and a half drive. And then 317 people would have had to drive further or catch an airplane flight, in some cases in an international flight, in order to get to this show. At some point you say, those folks almost certainly wouldn't have been here in person, but they got to see the show. And that made me very happy to see. Where did they come from? So here's a point on the map, different color for each night. In the US, came from all over. And this is really cool. My favorite thing, there was someone who tuned in from Athens, Greece for a play that's set in Athens, Greece. That's kind of great. So people coming from all over the world, people in the Philippines, Thailand, Australia, and Denmark. That's a different play. So what is next? I think we'll do this some more. I think we'll do this some more even when we start to go back in person, because it's just handy. And if anybody was curious, we demonstrated that there's lots of interest in family and friends from around the country and around the world being able to attend this. So what would I do differently? It is good to start the stream in advance. It's very good to start the stream in advance, not least to give crew plenty of time to make sure the stream's working. The main video board operator was absolutely fantastic. Second-year student, and she just took right to it. It's like she was just at home in doing this, and it was fantastic. Knowing she was at the helm, actually in the room, I really wasn't worried. I wouldn't start it quite as early as we did because IBM Watson cuts off recordings just a little bit short of 3 hours. And it doesn't do it very graciously. It automatically restarts another recording, but you lose about 10 or 12 seconds in between. And so I would do everything I could to time things to avoid that happening to a show. And so that's a small point, but an important point if you're archiving your stream and you want people to pay attention to it again. So maybe only about 20 or 25 minutes early. It's just, anyway, I'd run the numbers on the duration of the show. And of course, theater people are very good at telling you probably plus or minus a minute how long their show is going to be. And that turned out to be the case here as well. Bang on its timing. So it'd be very easy to calculate. So that's the thing that I would do next. Whoops, I missed a slide. There you go. There was a funny thing. I don't know these Panasonic cameras very well myself, and I didn't have a lot of time with them. I definitely set them on manual focus, but they came unfocused a couple of times. And I don't have a great explanation for why. Maybe that a ghost popped in from another play. I did order a Demon Quad and 3 Demon HDMI SDI converters for a bunch of reasons, a whole bunch of reasons. One, with an SDI run, we can go past 25 feet. We can put the camera almost anywhere in the room we want to, and it's a good sized room. 2, to have a dedicated piece of hardware to do this layout, this 3-up layout with 1 big image in the middle and 2 smaller images on the side is a piece of cake to do on the Demon Quad. I spent less than half an hour configuring it, much less. And then you've got a dedicated box that just does that all day long. That's its job to do. And it feeds a single stream on to OBS. And at least in theory, the computer should have less work to do. You're not asking the computer to interpret 3 streams, but 1 stream. And so the trouble is, it arrived very, very close to the beginning of the show, so close that I thought we've had successful tests so far. We're going to go with what we know, and we're just going to use the stuff without the Demon products, and just go with that. And of course, the day after the show closed, I tested it. And as you would imagine, it worked just fine. I asked in advance the director if he would be willing to bring back a couple of actors to do any scene they wanted solely for the purpose of just testing our new Demon equipment. And they were very happy to do that. I asked the rest of the crew, the technical director, if they'd be willing to hold off striking the set just for 1 more day. And they were. There's nothing else on the books coming immediately after, so that was fun. I mentioned this, so the work of compositing is offloaded to a dedicated device. It's often a good idea if you can design it, and a longer cable run. So what I'd really like to do is put all of this stuff into a small portable rack unit that we can mostly carry around the building, but have it be as much of an appliance as possible that someone can plug in without too much training And of course, we can reconfigure the daemon if we need to. That's easy to do. But so that's sort of next. That's something I want to do next. And so there's still no source clock with the decimator involved. And I did the same test again. And here's the last 2 minutes again. And guess what? It's still working fine. It's sync enough for what we're doing. I would never claim this is absolutely perfect sync, but it's sync enough for theater. One other advantage we had in that regard is everybody on stage was wearing masks the entire time. So, by the way, your sync could probably be off by half a second. Not that you'd want it to be, but that was a fascinating test. I still can't tell you quite why this works so well, but it seems to work. So. What else?
And that's my moonlight pride time.
Not jealous overall. There's Skipper. I've forsworn his betting company.
Terry! Ross Wanton. Am I not thy lord?
Then I must say, but I know when that has stolen away from fairyland, and in the shape of corn sat all day playing on pipes of corn and versing love to amorous Philadelphia. Why art thou here? Come from the harvest to the paper.
So that is a little bit of the test. The day after the show, this is probably the last day on Earth that a cast wants to come back and recreate a performance, but they're very gracious and did a scene just so we could test this equipment. So if I can get in quickly enough, I will. Yep, there we go. So this is our media asset management system, Imogen, and I've annotated the full stream archive with just very, very basic annotations that let me navigate around. And so I can play the credits here. And we can just let those run in the background. There's no audio under them. Happy to talk about our media asset management system as well if anybody's interested. So that's what I prepared to present, and I'm curious what questions people might have or observations people might have. Robin.
Yes, I was wondering about the audio, because I mean you have 3 different angles.
Yep.
What kind of audio do you present to the audience? Do you hear the left from the left camera, the right from the right camera, or for the center or stereo, or?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. If I did this slide deck again, I should really have a whole section on audio. We did something very simple for this. We hadn't done exactly this before, but my colleague Matthew put up a stereo pair. He was thinking about what can we hang, and how many microphones do we need, and where can we put them, hide them. And I said, just start by putting up a really simple ORDIF pair, and let it be in the center of the room, maybe a little higher than average, and just see what it sounds like. Let's just give that a listen, give it a try. And it was better than expected. When people were really far upstage, they started to fall off. And a few of our soft talkers started to fall off a bit. But the advantage over giving every single actor a lav was huge. We've got about 8 wireless lav packs that could be dedicated to that. And of course, there are many more characters than that in Midsummer. So that wasn't real popular to think about laving everybody up. And you don't always get great results if there's fabric noise and so forth. So this seemed to be pretty good. I think it was good enough for our first try. I would go back and think about where mics are, where we could hide maybe just another pair of mics upstage for people who are upstage, especially far upstage. Maybe just out in the wings, maybe shotguns pointed at some zones. And once you go there, then an auto mixer starts to seem like it could be a good idea. They're not infallible, but with some care and precision, they could be probably set pretty well and do a lot of good. And that would keep the crew count down. If we're still doing this in COVID times, that could be important. And we fed it through we did feed it through a very small mixer, just a little 4-channel mixer that was sitting next to the encoding computer, very modest thing, and took a tape output and gave it to one of the 3 hardware encoders. The Blackmagic intensity shuttle happens to have line in on an RCA connection. And so for OBS, we chose that as our audio source, and just muted everything else. So we weren't getting any audio from over HDMI from any of the 3 cameras. That's literally all we did for this. And it was probably 70% or possibly 80% of the way there.
What about the synchronization between the audio and the video? I saw there was approximately 1 frame between the different cameras here. Which video did you sync to?
Well, so the audio came in on the Blackmagic Intensity Shuttle, which the wide shot was encoding the video of. So it would be much easier to tell what was going on if people weren't wearing masks, but they were. So I'm not sure exactly how well we did, but I think we did okay. Yeah, I agree. I think it frame off. That sounds about right. Yeah.
Hey, Paul, I remember when you brought this up the first time a while back, but but one question I had was I didn't, and I can't remember your slide now, but all those cameras, I've been fiddling with some side cameras for helping people doing streaming with OBS. Did they all have pretty much the same capture rate and output rate to the HDMI output? I mean, were they all like 1080p at 60 or 30, or did you tweak any of those so they all kind of lined up?
We really lucked out in that department. One of the things I was dreading was, okay, I have to just kind of use the cameras that I can, not quite scrounge, but that are available to me. How's that going to go? And my first choice would have been at least to have 3 matching cameras. Right, that would just simplify things. We got really lucky in that all 3 gave 1080 at 60i or 30p approximately, and the encoders were all happy with them and didn't give me a lot of squawk back. I was really bracing to have to spend a long night worrying about frame rates and getting things to match, and we kind of got lucky. This is not a product endorsement, but I will say every time I've plugged the Magewell into something, it's just worked. There's no buttons, there's no software controller. I just plug it in and it just knows what to do. The Blackmagic Intensity Shuttle, which I understand was just discontinued, probably does more and has more controls and more options. But every once in a while, it didn't want to talk to OBS. I'd have to restart. And this is, I don't think I'm the first person to make observations of that sort. Yeah, I was really prepared to have to sweat those details.
Yeah, I was gonna say you led me on, your idea led me on to something else to help somebody else, and I had a couple Sony cameras that were all kind of in the same generation, and then I had a Canon one I hooked up and looked, all the specs looked the same, and just their chip, how their chips work, the numbers are the same, but they don't do the same, they don't sync, they just don't time out the exact. So I was like, kind of out of luck there. But I was gonna say, your Magewell thing, there was a YouTuber that was kind of doing capture card reviews, and it sounds like Magewell has kind of a piece, like a software interface. If you are to run it, you could actually tweak a lot of the settings. It works natively, but I got to be like, he was into like page 5 of things. And I was like, if it just works, leave it. But I mean, it's cool that you can do other things with it. But yeah, I was kind of impressed by that.
Yeah, you always want to be able to pop the hood when you need to, right? That's good. Oh yeah, I've never had reason to look. It's worked so well, so because consistently that I've never gone and Googled control software, but I will now. Thank you. Let's see, a couple questions. Panasonic, look into settings. Yeah, Daryl, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. It turned out to just work. Let's see. Oh, Daryl maybe has gone to another break. I don't know. Yeah, here he is. Hi, Daryl. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, thank you. I will gladly reach out, Daryl, if we need to do this and we're running into those kinds of issues. I'd be very, very happy to. And thank you for your offer. What were we using for mics? If I remember, it was a pair of Shure KSM 141s, if I remember correctly. I didn't set those up, right? If I had my hands on them, I'd remember.
How did you mix in your audio to your OBS setup, or did you run it through one of the cameras?
I thought about that. I thought about running it through the camera, but I think there's a lot of potential to generate some extra noise, and that Blackmagic Intensity Shuttle just happens to have line level input on an RCA pair. So it's the simplest possible setup. We sent the mics through just a little 4-channel mixer and used tape out to go into the Blackmagic. Really, really simple. Just couldn't be simpler. And, obviously panned one all the way left, the other all the way to the right. Yes, that is a 1980s font. You can Google arcade font and find some really wonderful retro things, really terrific 8-bit looking things out there.
Look up vaporware aesthetic.
Okay.
It's actually a whole thing.
Vaporware aesthetic. I will Google that later. I had a blast. I had so much fun coming up with a little bit of video design. It's not anything terribly time consuming or really all that involved, but just to make a choice about something as simple as what font are you using and how does it line up with what people are doing? What is this show? What century is it from? That sort of thing. I mocked up a couple designs for a title plate to use. And none of them really felt right. And I said, well, wait a minute, they're setting this thing in the 80s. So I should go take a great big whiff of 1980s graphic design. And in fact, there's a site where you can go type in whatever text you want and it gives you the graphic. That's exactly what I used. It's not original graphic design, but let your choices be motivated by what's going on in the production, right? What about a Shure ceiling mic? Yeah. Sure, ceiling mic. I would try anything next time just to experiment and have the chance to play more with coverage and who can be heard well and so forth. Very near to opening night, it was clear that a couple people were really falling off who had some big lines, and the director and the cast had a lot of fun playing with and experimenting with and being intentional about what is playable space in terms of camera, because they could see it, right? They could see it show up right on the live stream. They were streaming rehearsals as well, so they could see what's going on. And so if we do this again, I'll want to encourage the idea of playable space in terms of audio and give them more playable spaces in audio terms as well, where they can really show up well. So I was just saying, let's think about adding a third mic, mix it dead center, that's real close to where this one person whose lines were falling off delivered those lines. But the director was actually willing to reblock the show a couple days before open. That's extremely unusual and a very high degree of flexibility and general awesomeness to let that decision be made artistically around what was happening technically. Not the kind of thing I would have predicted or ever expected at all. Did we think about a 360-degree camera? Well, that's interesting. So 360. So 360, if you put 360 in the best seat in the house, right, then the front 180 is really interesting and the back 180 is dark seats, right? So we wouldn't do that. But if you take a 360 camera and put it in the middle of the stage, center, right, then everything around you it's all around you. And that could be really interesting. That could be super, super fun to see. And another aesthetic choice, do you disguise it? Do you turn it into like a house plant or something that nobody can tell that it's a camera? Or do you just let it be a camera and say, no, this is the production, this is how we're doing it? Or is there really just that one angle, right, from the 360 camera? There aren't any other cameras, and so you don't have to worry about hiding it because the camera can't see itself, right? So really interesting set of choices. I'd love to try it. I'd love to try it just to see what it looks like. What model would you use, Pete?
I didn't use it, but actually we did yesterday evening. We had also a theater production with us, and they came to us a week ago or something. We want to do this, and so I had to find a solution with 3 cameras. But we did it like a television production, 3 cameras and a mixer.
Yep.
So
Yep. How did it
we
go?
are using DTP from Extron, or HD-based-T is working also.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a whole black magic system. We actually have two ATEM switchers. One is in a kind of a Go kit, and the other has the full studio control interface, and that just lives up in the Studio A control room. And there's a television production class that uses both of those switchers, 2 terms out of 3 terms per year. When those classes are happening, they get used a lot. And just the coincidence of those classes aren't happening right now because they can't meet in person. I went a long ways down the road of thinking, okay, what if we bring that system upstairs just for about 4 weeks and do it that way? And the thinking in our group, at least for this production, was the more we can make it feel like theater and less like anything else is a good idea. And this was what we came up with. I, of course, am not opposed to live switch television. It feels like home to me. It's not a problem for me to imagine doing that. And I think it can serve theater just fine. NT Live from the UK does a magnificent job of what is effectively live switched video. It's not being televised in the moment, but it's being sent to cinemas in the moment. And they use very many more than 3 cameras. I think those may be 5 camera shoots, and they're pretty terrific. So are people here involved with the theater department at their institution regularly or get called in occasionally?
There were students yesterday with us, so they wanted to stream it because there is no people in the room.
Yeah.
But they would have done it themselves. But last week they thought that's too difficult, so they came to us. But it's the first time we do this, only for COVID. And we have 1 production in a year, so.
Okay. There are 3 productions a year here, and they're meant to be flagship theater productions. You know, everybody on campus and actually anybody who lives in the town is invited. These three times a year. And this is the first time we've tried to stream that. Colleague Matthew has been streaming quite a lot of music in our new performance hall to our IBM Watson account. And that's going well. And of course, there's a much more sophisticated audio system involved there. His excellent expertise at miking things. He's got a 3-camera PTZ system. He's able to cover orchestra, jazz band, and so forth. And he's got it looking really good.
Does he use like an NDI system of some sort, or?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. He's got an Extron 351 that's pointed at IBM Ustream. And I can't remember what he's got for a control surface for those PTZ cameras. It's a pretty modest little, joystick type device. Much more about it.
Yeah, they decided to make the call to kill our theater program here on our campus. So we're kind of running on fumes, and then obviously having a year off of the last 2 years of our theater program not having it. But they opted for a little extra money so we could do some stuff and stream it just so you get the license to broadcast. And so we've kind of done a couple small 3-act plays and stuff like that on our stage that we can do safely at a park. But yeah, it's interesting on the, everybody's like, well, can't you just videotape it or stream it? It's like, usually you can, and you don't usually want to do that for theater, but they're willing to make an effort here, kind of the last hurrah of our program. But the music department's taken notice about, we want to do concerts like this. And it's like concert hall audio is being encoded and streamed. It's not going to have the punch that you think it is, but it looks cool,
Yeah, it's interesting problem. It can sound pretty good. It can. It doesn't necessarily have to suffer if you're crunching it at too low a bit rate, of course you're going to start to hear artifacts. But I've been delighted to tune in. to some of the music streams that Matthew puts on. He's kind of got it tuned up. He's got it sounding pretty good.
Well, if you wouldn't mind talking to him to see what he's doing to kind of, I mean, obviously you can capture everything raw and then stream it not live, but live, if he has some, if you ever want to invite him on, I'd love to hear it, because that's why I'm taking this session right now with you. Is I was hit up just like 2 weeks ago. We need to stream everything next year. I'm like, get the licensing and tell me how much money you got left, then we'll talk.
But that's right.
But that's the thing, is we've always had that tinny audio problem that, you know, we want to do it on the cheap and have a student run it, but I'm like, it's not going to sound like you think it's going to sound like, unless we actually put some effort and thought into this. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to hear what he's doing, because it's going to be it's going to be a little bit of a difficult issue next year, because when it doesn't sound the way it needs to sound, I'm like, I know.
Yeah, I mean, I would start by making a test recording of the space that you're also streaming, right? So you're listening to PCM audio that you get right off the box, whatever the box is, right out of the mixer, right out of the recorder, whatever that is. And also stream it and archive that stream and be able to listen back to those two things and A/B them, right? And say, well, if they don't sound appreciably different, then you have work on the front end to do, right? But if they sound appreciably different, then you know something about streaming it is causing trouble, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Say I was talking to my student, because I was trying to explain what you were doing, because you talked about it earlier. The decimator again. What I forgot when you guys were talking about this, and this is obviously several weeks back. You ran all your stuff into the decimator, then your decimator into your OBS, right? That was okay. And then on the decimator, when you did the layout, were you able to map out the placement of the stuff through the decimator? Did it have like a web GUI, or was it just kind of like this quadrant here, this quadrant here, or could you kind of massage it to where you wanted it to be manually?
Yes, there was a web interface. You plug the device in and type in an IP address, and then you're in the control panel for the device. And you have, as I recall, pixel accuracy.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
So I was not limited to saying, you know, the screen's divided into ninths. Which ninth do you want your video in? I could say, I want this window to be 813 pixels wide, because that matches the aspect ratio that it needs to be for the height, right? Or 814, right? So it's just XY coordinate math of how big your thing is and where its upper left corner starts.
Was it like 4K, or did it, like, what was its base canvas to start with, or did it have a?
I don't remember if that supports 4K or not. That'd be really easy to Google.
Would you mind throwing the model number, the device up?
Sure.
Thanks.
Sure. Yeah.
So I won't house you on tech details. I'll just look it up. But no,
Yeah,
I was
sure.
kind of like that. That's another way to tackle the problem. Not like thinking ahead. It's like, I wouldn't mind that being our head end for kind of tapping into this by default.
Well, I hadn't worked with one before. I was familiar with what they are and what they do. And I was totally pleased with how easy it was to work with. It wasn't really any different than laying out graphics.
Oh no,
Premiere.
I'd like to preset it a little bit if we could do it, and just like this whole, a student needs to be able to run it is going to be like, I mean, what you did for your theater performances, and I'm not impressed because it's not impossible. I think you did an amazing job looking at your stuff. It's one of those rinse and repeat kind of things. Like, can you do it? Can you hit that mark every time without the extra work? And I kind of want to make sure if I sell them on the idea, if we're going to do this, we need to be invested in the right hardware, the right setup, and then you know.
Yeah, if you're looking at the user manual, check out how many presets there are, because it can definitely store presets. And then you just need to grab your label maker, right? Run a piece of tape on the outside of the device and tell students number 1, number 3.
Well, my hope was like I throw it into like an Extron control system. If I could configure if it had an IP interface, that we could actually just trip over, like have an X breakout panel. Like, I want preset 1 for this, like solo instrumental, or you know, split screen kind of thing. I don't, whatever you're going to feed into what you're feeding into.
Interesting. If I get that, I mean, it's parts and pieces in a box right now. It's not set up for anything. If I get that set up again before I go away for the summer, I can give it a little test. Since I wasn't using it this way, I don't know what it would be like to try and use it as a form of live switcher. Whether there's any burst in between preset 1 and preset 2.
That would be
I-
interesting.
that
I mean,
don't
because
know,
if it's doing some
I don't know.
reclocking, just to, like for distance, I bet I wonder if you had it set up and so you weren't fighting so much that I wonder if it would just do it pretty quickly, seamlessly.
Yeah, it might. I don't know. It's worth a test, but if that's something that's important to you for what you're trying to incorporate it into production design as, then might be worth a closer look. Yeah, it could be great. It could be really seamless. I don't know. So I mentioned our media asset management system. Is that something that some of you work on at all? Yeah. Okay. All right.
We just had a buyout, and the person that's dealt for the last 35 years of all of our archiving and didn't document anything but encoded everything, he's leaving. I might be getting that project.
All right. All right.
So,
yeah. Goes that way sometimes.
I was not a good call yesterday. So
okay. Well, we use a product called Imogen, a service called Imogen. They're based in the UK. I'll share my screen again quickly. And I'll just share my whole desktop for ease at the moment. And so they branded it for us, so it looks and feels as much as possible like Carleton. It's a slightly different URL, but it ends in carleton.edu. And it's all about records, managing records. So what you're really doing first is creating a record and then adding media to it. And one of the coolest things about it is these annotations, right? So I can skip around to marked points in a very long piece of video. This is hugely advantageous for faculty. One of the use cases for Imogen on our campus was faculty that I support most closely teach movies. They have hundreds of movies that they had set bookmarks on in their old Mac DVD player, right? And the DVD player on their computer remembered those bookmarks. And so the next time they taught the class, they put in the same disk and up pops their bookmarks, and they can go directly to wherever they need to in a movie and show you the Snow Globe and Citizen Kane or whatever it is, right? And so obviously, we've known about this problem for a while. Not only were shiny disk slots going away, but a couple of versions of the Mac OS DVD player itself as a piece of software went away. Obviously, isn't coming back. So we needed to come up with something for them. There needed to be something to replace that. And they use this annotation feature a ton. You can also draw on the screen in it. There are different types of annotations. You can make a mark on the screen that circles an area of the image, that sort of thing. It supports latitude and longitude, if that's interesting or useful to you. Someday it will be. I mean, I can't think of a use for, theater piece, but it doesn't matter. Someone will think of a use for it. It's kind of great. And then you can name your own layer as well. You click 5 stars, rate things, and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of possibility there, especially in giving feedback, right? If a student uploads a piece and a faculty member wants to give feedback on that piece, they can use this annotation system and be as precise as they want to be in that way, pointing out portions of the image or a moment when the soundtrack is doing something, whatever they want. We have it tied into our single sign-on so that, stop sharing here, so that when you log in as a student, you can be automatically added to a group that represents the class you're registered for. And there's a terrific administrator, Les LaCroix, in ITS, Carleton, who figured out how to do that, how to stitch Carleton's identity management system together with Imogen. And he basically gave me a recipe that I follow before the beginning of every term, and then it just happens. And so this saves a ton of time and work checklisting, manually checklisting, who's registered for what. At a relatively small school like Carleton, you probably could do that by hand for a while, although it's inevitably error prone. At a big school, it would just be a non-starter. How in the world would you do that for a class of 100 times dozens of classes? So that's been great. That's actually worked really nicely. There's a batch import feature. It works over FTP, depends on uploading things to an FTP site that kind of lives on the back end of Imagen. And I know Archives is interested in that. Yeah, it's pretty great. That's my little short spiel about it. Any last thoughts?
So quick fun fact, just because you got me thinking,
Sure.
Extron does have a driver for the Decimator Demon Quad to control it.
Cool.
RS-232,
that's
not IP. So yeah, this I appreciate you bringing this up. This might
Sure.
be a solution for me.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, if you do try those presets, if you wouldn't want to like pop in a
Yeah.
just see what happens. I might hit you up on that because I think I could sell this idea to them.
Cool. Yeah, I don't have any plans to reinstall it yet this spring, but if I get done with my other projects, my other in-person stuff, and I have the chance to, you've got me curious as well. So.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you listening to me and thinking about what I'm up to and asking terrific questions. And thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for doing it.
Absolutely.